Hello everybody and welcome to my review of the RV180. This is gonna be a different one because I cannot really show you things happening in real time just because the interface is so slow as you can see here. So I'm gonna mostly operate using screenshots and only use videos when it's really relevant. This waiting page happens every time you click anything. It's really painful, and this is the biggest negative point of this product. Not a deal breaker because, you don't change settings all the time. When you log in, you're greeted by the getting started screen. There's nothing really useful here, just links to the most used features. I don't understand why upgrade firmware is one of them, for example. But yeah, let's go to dashboard now. The dashboard works as a dashboard. Not very useful because CPU utilization is always high and the VPN information is always wrong. But it is there, maybe we'll find it useful. The system summary is basically a dashboard organized in a vertical way. It shows the same kind of information. In IPsec connection status, you can see the status of your tunnels. Here you get the destination of the tunnel, traffic statistics, and whether it's connected or not. You can also use the buttons to try to connect the tunnel or drop a call. Not a call, a connection. In VPN client connection status, you have the list of users and whether they are connected or not, when they last connected, and the duration of the connection. You also see a list of protocols that are configured for the respective users and the option to kick off the tunnel, not kick off, disconnect the tunnel if you need to keep. Logs are where you see the logs. In logging policy, you can have different logging policies created based on what you want to see in the logs. Very useful and interesting, and much more advanced than what you have on the RV042. Here I have the default, and also created on IPsec to filter out of the log useless. You can also adjust the severity, just standard syslog thing. And if you click in show, you will see the logs after waiting for a while till it loads. In login policies, you can create and edit the login policies I mentioned previously. Here you can choose what severity levels for what system part you want to see in your logs, and you also can choose whether you want or not to see VPN logs as part of the log output in your policy. Here is another pointless self-explanatory screen showing two of the clients that are running in my network. This router supports opening and closing ports on the firewall and forwarding the traffic based on parameters you can choose, and on this screen you can see whether this is happening and how much time until the router closes the ports again. In port statistics, just like in the RV042, you can see the speed of each port, whether the port is enabled or not, and how many bytes and frames were transmitted since the counters were last reset or the router rebooted. In View Open Ports, you get a list of all the open connections in your network. And it's just like you do a netstat command for all the devices that have connections passing through your router. It's a very useful screen. Captive portals are the stupid pages that you have sometimes in cafes, where you need to enter some credential before you can browse the internet. This router has a built-in captive portal server thing, and if you have inactive sessions, you can find out here what the devices are and what IP address they have. In IPv4 WAN internet, you configure your provider parameters so you can go online. In this case, this router is connected to a DSL modem that also has router functions, but they are disabled, and you can enter all the information relevant to have your internet connection working. If you have this router, you just need to copy the information that you have configured in the device provided by your provider and replicate the settings here. If a provider allows you to go online only from a specific device, you can configure the router to emulate the MAC address so your provider will let you go online. In LAN settings, you adjust the range of IPs that the router, if it's configured as the DHCP server, will assign to the clients in your network. And if you go to configure static DHCP, you can ensure that servers, for example, always get the same IP address. Automatic configuration is a very interesting feature. Let's suppose you manage a huge network and you ship devices around. You don't have to have them all pre-configured hoping it will work. You can ship the device in a box just with this option enabled and configure to point to a server where you store the settings. Then, when your colleague at this place or your friend will put the router online, it will download the rest of the configuration straight from the FTP server you configure there. The list of current DHCP clients will be shown in this list. Nice feature, you can make it static easily, much less complicated than the RV042. Jabber frames is a feature that allows the network interface to send packets bigger than the usual. It's out of the scope of this video. If you're interested, I can cover in a different episode. In routing mode, you can choose whether the device is acting as a gateway or as a router. It depends on your network, but most cases are gonna use NAT. This is a very unnecessary screen that makes you click a button to just see what you're looking for, and that's the routing table. The table is automatically populated by the router based on your provider, your internal network, the tunnels you have. But if you have a need of configure it manually, here is another screen. If you are building a much larger project than ours, you may also want to configure automatic routing using RIP. I'm not sure people say RIP or RIP, but there you have it. In port management, you can configure the options of your Ethernet ports. Auto negotiation, flow control, where there is full or half duplex, and speed. Some devices have problems automatically negotiating, and you can force the settings here. In dynamic DNS, you can use one of the providers listed here to automatically assign your ever-changing IPv4 address to a specific domain name. My provider of choice, no IP, is not listed here, so this is useless for me. It may be useful for you. In our project, we are going to use no IP because that's the one I trust and has been working well for me for more than 10 years. Next, you can choose whether your router is operating on IPv4 or IPv4 and IPv6. This provider doesn't give any IPv6 option at the moment, or as far as I know, so I keep it IPv4 only to not mess up with the rest of the configuration. IPv6.1 options are disabled because the IPv6 stack is disabled in the IP mode screen. The same is true for the IPv6 LAN settings. IPv6 to v4 tunneling helps IPv6 traffic reach IPv4 networks and vice versa, I think. Since IPv6 is disabled, I'm not using it as well. In access rules, you configure your basic firewall settings, what can go in and out of your network. It works like the RV042. You can use the predefined settings, or you can create rules for your own services, time of the day, etc, etc, etc. It works as expected, works as designed. Here you can configure the IPv6 firewall. Since it's a different protocol, it works in a different way, of course. In attack prevention, you have options to prevent common types of attacks on the internet. For example, you can configure your router to ignore pings, or to really don't respond to anonymous ICMP messages. You will want to have this all enabled unless you have very specific needs. I don't know, I can think of maybe running a game server, perhaps an older game server, or some application that is really misbehaving and you really need that application running. Yeah? So my recommendation would be really to have it all enabled. And if you need details on how it works, you can get it on very good help that's attached to the device. What I said just makes no sense, but I think you understood. In content filtering settings, you can have protection to your machines in the sense of exploits that are delivered via HTTP when you're browsing the internet. For example, if you block proxy, you're going to avoid users connecting to external proxies and not tunneling, but forwarding the HTTP traffic through that proxy to connect to the internet. You can also block Java and Java Online applications. Block ActiveX, that's one of the saddest Microsoft ideas ever, that's thankfully dying. And you can also block cookies. Blocking cookies is not recommendable because you would really destroy the web experience. Pages like Google News, Gmail, or not sure about Wikipedia, but many pages deliver functionality through cookies, and web would be mostly broken without it. Of course, if you are neurotic, go for it. In URL blocking, you can block pages using keywords. For example, if you decide to block porn, you would block any pages containing the word porn as the router analyzes the traffic that's going through. However, nowadays a lot of the traffic online goes encrypted using HTTPS, make it invisible to the router, so this option doesn't do that much anymore. For this kind of filtering, you would need, for example, to set up a web proxy on your network and have all users sending the traffic through it and this proxy initiating the connections. Port triggering does what I mentioned in the screen earlier in the video. You can create rules that will allow traffic through based on the parameters you set. For example, if external traffic hits port 80, you can allow it to be answered for a different range in the internal network. I'm not exactly sure why I would use such feature myself, but I can think of many use cases where system administrators would need to do that. Port forwarding allows you to have one public IP and point services to different hosts inside your network. For example, here I forward traffic, HTTP traffic to the web servers internally. If you have a single host that should answer to all the external traffic, you can configure it as your DMZ host here. If you're lucky enough to have multiple external IPv4 addresses being delivered to you by your provider, you can configure which internal host is going to receive traffic for each external IP in one-to-one net. I'm hopefully going to be able to demonstrate this feature in the near future. In MAC filtering, you can operate in one of the two ways. Or you add every MAC address of every computer and device you own here and block the rest, meaning all traffic from them will be blocked, or you can blacklist non-wanted hosts and allow the rest, your choice. I don't really need such feature in my environment, but you know who you are if you do. In IP MAC binding, you can ensure the devices you need always receive the same IP addresses. So firewall configuration, hostname configuration all becomes easier. If you're running a very specific service that's not in the predefined list, such as my Civilization 5 dedicated server, you can enter the protocol and the list of required ports here. So whenever you configure forwarding rules and firewall, you don't need to enter all the details every time. You just need to pick the service from the list. In schedules, you can create schedules to use in firewalls, access rules, etc. For example, you can have work hours or your children's bedtime as a schedule, and for example, you block their devices at 10 p.m. You can do that with this device. In session settings, you can define the timers for your router to kill idle connections, clean its own internal tables, and etc. Unless you have very specific needs or a misbehaving application that keeps dropping or timing out, you won't need to change anything here. I have no idea what this is for, to be honest with you. In LAN group settings, you can organize your devices by IP address and then have different rules set to each of them. This is not a VLAN, but allows you to really specify configuration based on IPs. ALG stands for Application Level Gateway, and in that case, the router should work as a SIP application layer gateway. But I really don't know how it works in practice. I don't have how to test, and there don't seem to be many parameters here to be configured. So if you know, leave a comment. The next minute or two, we'll cover VPN. I'm just showing here some screenshots because I'm gonna have a dedicated episode only about configuring VPN tunnels between two RV042s and between RV042s and RV120s in different variations, such as both ends with dynamic IP, one end with dynamic IP, one with fixed IP, different authentication methods, etc., etc. So just enjoy the screenshots as an illustration of how the user interface here looks like. In PPTP server, you can configure your PPTP server the range of IPs is gonna give to clients, and your user configuration. You should really not be using that, so I'm not gonna go into many details again. In VPN pass-through, you can allow or not devices in your network to connect to external VPN servers. Many employers may not want the employees to connect to VPN servers. For example, traffic is encrypted and they will be watching YouTube and ruining the connection for the others, for example. There are different reasons why you would not want VPN to work, and if you have a good reason, then there's where you enable it. In certificates, you can upload certificates to the router, so when you log in, you get the lock, the traffic is encrypted, and you can know whether there is someone eavesdropping the traffic that you send to your router, reading your password or reading your configuration, for example. If you are in a security sensitive environment, you should enable this. And of course, generate certificates and upload them here, etc., etc. You know who you are if you need it. Remember I mentioned the captive portal. So here you can enable it and also divide your network in two. For example, you can have your own devices that will not need credentials and can talk to each other and talk to the internet freely. But also, for example, if you don't like your friends to come over and access your things, but you still want them to be able to browse the internet, you can create a new VLAN and force the traffic only from the guest devices to go through the captive portal. So they're going to have to ask your Wi-Fi password and your captive portal credentials. Or you can also use it to punish your kids. If you enable the captive portal before, here's where you're going to create user accounts for it. I really don't know how 802.x works, so I'm going to skip it. If you do know, leave a comment, point me to some documentation, etc. In KOS settings, you can manage your bandwidth availability to your hosts to ensure that servers run well and that someone doesn't take all the available pipe. If you create a profile here, you can then assign it to specific clients, as I just said, but then you can match the profile with a protocol. For example, you can ensure that browsing the internet is always quick and fast when HTTP is used, but you can also assign the limitations or limit traffic based on the source devices by IP address. Another way of controlling traffic and be sure everything flows as expected is to use class of services. This is more complicated because it requires configuration on the client side, but for more complex environments, it's a must. For example, IP telephony or your content delivery. In this page, you can configure what sources can connect to the management interface of your router. For security sensitive environments, it's a must, but you need to be careful to not lock yourself out of the device when you change that. I've done that, it's really bad. Password aging forces you to change your password often. I don't see why you would not use it. Just enable it, live with it, deal with it. You can also enable multiple user accounts. If you have an environment where many people have access to the configuration, it's a way to audit who is doing changes and who is breaking things or not by having each person using and logging into the router using his or her own user account. We are going to cover SNMP in the future, but if you already have some monitoring solution in place, here is how you configure how the information goes from your router to whatever SNMP solution you are using. If you have a metered connection, here is where you want to keep an eye in your bandwidth usage and set up limits and alerts in case you go over it. I really wish the RV042 had this feature because my secondary connection is a 3G connection. It doesn't, but here you go. Nice feature. You can monitor usage. You can go against your provider if he's overcharging you, for example. Here you can ping, trace, do whatever network test you need. Self-explanatory. If you need help, send a comment or Google. The feature works as advertised. You enter an IP address, you click ping, and that's it. In case you are having very strange issues with an application or with your network, you can capture the traffic and analyze it using a tool like Wireshark, and that may help you find the root cause of the problem. This is something that I recommend learning. Download the tool, get some example captures, and see what you can infer from there. It really gives you a lot of information on how computers and the internet work if you dig deep. In firewall logs, you can choose what kind of information regarding the firewall is going to be stored in logs, naturally. For example, you can get to know every single IP that ever connects to your network and every single IP that your network tries to connect to. The logs get filled very fast, so this is the most useful when you can actually store them in some syslog server, and this is something that we are going to cover in our series. So whatever log configuration is set in your device, it's gonna be stored internally up to the limit of the device memory, not memory, storage, or it's gonna be forwarded to the devices you enter in this screen. Bonjour is that stupid thing that lets you double click my computer and go for devices and already see your router there, your switch, your Wi-Fi. I hate it. It generates a lot of broadcasts and it's a bit broken in old versions of macOS, flooding the logs. So I disable it whenever I can because it's just useless. It's for lazy people. I don't like it. And yeah, if you like it, it's your problem. I really hate it. Universal Plug and Play is a feature that allows applications, for example Skype, to open a port in your router, in your firewall, and enable the traffic to be redirected from your public IP to that specific Skype application. So for example, when you're online in Skype and someone tries to call you, your call is going to reach your computer just because the router knows what client in your network has Skype running. It's useful even though older router versions can have security holes, but it's a very important functionality to use the computer normally nowadays, so I keep it enabled in most cases. Configure an NTP server allows the router to upgrade its own time, not upgrade, update its own time from a source on the internet. If you don't enable it, you're probably gonna go crazy, so please do use it. In backup and restore configuration, you can, just like the RV042, make backups before you do changes and quickly restore the configuration in case you need to change your hardware or fix some firmware upgrade that went wrong, for example. It's good to have. It doesn't cost anything, files are very small. This device has a very interesting feature that allows you to create a CSV file based on the format Cisco specifies and easily import the configuration to the router. For example, again, you have a lot of devices and you can create a script that generates CSV configuration files for you, and then all you have to do is just upload it to the devices. Very useful, even though I don't use it. But if you're gonna take this cloud project really far and have 20 locations, that's the way to go. Here is another self-explanatory screen. The router setup wizard is the most useless feature of this device because it allows you to leverage 1% of the functionality of the device. So, well, if you're gonna configure your router using this, you can just survive by buying a much cheaper router, and that's it. And now to end the day, another self-explanatory screen. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.